There is a belief, old, persistent, almost theological in its stubbornness, that the human mind is sovereign, that whatever lives inside the skull belongs absolutely and finally to the person carrying it. Civilizations have been constructed on this premise. Laws written, wars fought, philosophies erected like cathedrals, tall, intricate, desperately reaching toward something that would confirm, you are your own. And yet, there have always been certain men, careful men, patient men, men who wore pressed shirts and attended church and kissed their wives goodbye at breakfast, who looked at the human mind the way a locksmith looks at a door he has not yet opened, not with malice, necessarily with curiosity. I know these men. I know them the way only a witness can know someone, completely and without mercy. I am a notepad, spiral-bound, 120 pages, college-ruled, manufactured in the early 1950s, somewhere in the American Midwest. My cover is gray-green, a color that has no name in poetry, only in government surplus catalogs. I have watched, and I have held. And what I held, what was pressed into my skin with the blunt scratching of a government-issue ballpoint, was not science. It was the documentation of a disappearance, not of a body, of a self. Observation, the first. The architecture of trust. Let me tell you what I remember about the beginning. I remember being new. The smell of fresh paper is something I carry in memory the way humans carry the smell of their mother's kitchen, as identity, as origin. My pages were white and unviolated, each one a kind of promise. The pressure of being unopened, the very specific tension of a thing that has not yet been asked to do harm. I arrived in a room 352B of a research facility whose name I will not render, not out of discretion, but because discretion is the first language of the place that housed me. The room smelled of industrial solvent, old paper, and something faintly sweet that I would later understand was either a chemical compound or ambition. Perhaps both. The man who carried me wore a white coat over a white shirt. His hands were clean in the surgical sense, not merely washed, but managed. He held me the way careful men hold new things. With 2 fingers, a slight distance from the body as if to say, I am not yet responsible for what you become. His name is not mine to give, but I will call him, because every story needs its architect. I will call him the Methodologist. The Methodologist believed in the structured mind the way certain men believe in God, not with transcendence, but with the desperate practicality of someone who has decided that uncertainty is a security risk. He was afraid. This is the first psychological truth I must offer you, because it is the one most carefully buried beneath the language he wrote into my pages. He was afraid that the enemy, any enemy, every enemy, had already discovered the door into a man's mind, and he could not bear to be second. Fear dressed in the language of necessity. It is perhaps the most dangerous costume in human history. He began writing in me at 0700 hours on a Tuesday in spring. The first entry was procedural, dry as chalk. A list of compounds, their proposed dosages, their theoretical effects on synaptic inhibition. The handwriting was precise, each letter formed with the small, deliberate strokes of someone who had trained themselves out of personality. No loops, no flourishes. Just the flat architecture of a man who had decided that feeling was a variable to be controlled. I held his words the way I was made to hold them, faithfully, without interpretation. But I want you to understand what faithfulness costs a witness. There was another man. I will call him the subject. He was not an enemy. He was not a volunteer in any honest sense of that word. The consent forms, which I was shown once, were written in language so tilted, so architecturally misleading, that they constituted a kind of legal hallucination. He was 26 years old. He believed, and this is important, this is everything, he believed he was participating in a study on human stress responses. He had been told this by people in white coats who shook his hand with firm, trustworthy grips. Trust is a remarkable architecture. It requires almost nothing to build: a uniform, a firm handshake, an official-looking form, and it can house extraordinary things inside itself before the occupant realizes the walls have no exits. The subject's handwriting appears in my pages beginning on day 3. The methodologist had instructed him to write freely. Stream of consciousness, he was told. We are measuring cognitive fluency. There is no wrong answer. He began with small things. He wrote about his mother's garden in Ohio, the specific orange of her marigolds, how she watered them in the early morning still wearing her housecoat. He wrote about a girl he'd been corresponding with, how her letters smelled faintly of something he couldn't identify but associated entirely with her. He wrote about a baseball game, the particular crack of a bat that still lived somewhere in his chest when he thought about it. He wrote the way people write when they believe they are safe, fully, with the abandon of someone who has handed their coat to a trusted attendant and walked into a warm room. This is what I held in my earliest pages, the warmth of a man who was still whole. Psychological reveal. Here is something the documentation never stated directly, but which I absorbed through the pressure of the pen on my pages. The methodologist did not hate the subject. He did not think of him with cruelty or with sadism or with the theatrical villainy that makes such stories easier to dismiss. He thought of him with the same focused abstraction with which a surgeon thinks of a body on a table, as a site of inquiry, not a person. The depersonalization was not monstrous, it was trained. It had been arrived at through years of institutional language, through the slow erosion of individual humanity, by the vocabulary of research, subjects, variables, outcomes, data. The cruelty was not in the intention. It was in the architecture. It was in what the methodologist had allowed language to do to his perception without ever noticing the renovation. Observation the second, the Cartography of Dissolution. By day 9, the subject's entries had changed, not shattered, not collapsed, changed, the way a river changes direction, slowly, through erosion, through the patient rerouting of pressure. He wrote about the marigolds again, but this time he could not locate the orange. He wrote around the color, something warm, something that felt like afternoon, a color I associate with her hands. But the specific orange, the one that had been so vivid, so immediate, had slipped behind a membrane he couldn't quite reach, through. He noted this himself, in the margin, in smaller letters, almost apologetically. Strange. I know there's a color here. I just can't find it right now. The compounds being administered, LSD, mescaline, barbiturates in rotating sequences, sleep deprivation calibrated to specific REM interruption patterns, were not being used recreationally or even simply. They were being used architecturally, to dismantle a specific load-bearing wall and see what the structure did without it. The load-bearing wall was identity. The experiment at its core was asking a question that no institutional language could quite sanitize into science. If you take away a man's access to himself, his memories, his emotional continuity, his ability to trust his own perceptions, what remains? And can what remains be redirected? I want to speak now about the weight of what I carried. Not metaphorically, physically, I am a thin object. My cover stock is perhaps 2 millimeters thick. My pages, at full count, offer no significant mass. And yet, as the days accumulated and the entries multiplied, I became heavy in a way that had nothing to do with paper. The methodologist would set me down on the table at the end of each session with a precision that contained, I'm certain of this, I felt it, a specific discomfort. He would place me down and then his hand would remain on my cover for a moment longer than protocol required. As if he were holding something down. As if he were afraid of what would rise from my pages if he lifted his hand. Psychological reveal. This is the second truth I need to offer. The subject was not, in the deeper sense, passive. He was fighting, not with resistance. He had been robbed of the cognitive resources that resistance requires, but with inscription, with the act of writing itself. Every time the methodologist placed me before him and instructed him to write freely, the subject wrote. He wrote even when the words no longer assembled into narrative. He wrote even when the entries became fragmented, clauses without conclusions, images without context, a sentence that began "she smells like" and then stopped, not from laziness, but from the specific agony of a man reaching for something that has been moved without his knowledge. He was trying to leave evidence, not consciously. His access to conscious intention had been significantly compromised by this point. But in the reptilian way of all living things, in the survival deep instinct that says, if I can make a mark, I exist. If I exist, I am not entirely gone. I held this. I held the record of a man trying to prove to himself, through the act of inscription, that he was still there. This is perhaps the most human thing I have ever held, and I have held a great deal. By day 17, the entries in my pages had become something that resists easy categorization. There were drawings, simple ones made, with the same ballpoint pressed with varying degrees of force, a circle, a series of horizontal lines. What might have been a face, or a window, or simply a repetition of form that the hand produced when the mind had temporarily relinquished its editorial function. There was a single entry that consisted entirely of the word Ohio written 47 times. Not in distress. The handwriting was calm, almost meditative. Ohio. 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 As if the word itself were a rope thrown to something that was sinking, and the act of writing it, again and again and again, was the act of holding on. His entries changed in one more way I must describe. Before I leave this observation, he stopped writing about the future. This is remarkable because, in the early days, his entries were populated with futures, oblique, casual ones, the way a young man thinks forward without effort. When I get back to Ohio, when this study is done, I want to try. Next spring, maybe. By day 17, there was only the present tense, only the immediate, only the perceivable. It is a small thing to note. It is also everything. The capacity to imagine forward, to project the self into a future where the self continues to exist and act, is perhaps one of the most fundamental features of a mind that believes in itself. When it disappears, something is gone that is very difficult to name and very easy to miss. The Methodologist noted this in his own entries. In the clinical section I was also made to host, as a reduction in prospective cognition consistent with expected outcomes. Expected. Observation, the third, what remains. When the architecture falls, there is a particular quality of silence that descends in the aftermath of something that cannot be taken back. I know it because I have sat inside it. After the formal study period concluded, after the last supervised session, after the last clinical notation by the methodologist in his careful, affectless hand, I was placed inside a manila envelope, sealed with a brass brad, and filed, in a room full of other filed things, other sealed envelopes, other containers, of documentation that someone had decided was simultaneously important enough to keep and dangerous enough to archive. I spent years in that drawer, in the dark, in the specific cold of a maintained archive. Not natural cold, not seasonal cold, but the managed, continuous cold of a room where the temperature is kept constant because the things it houses are meant to endure. He endured. And in the dark, in the silence, I turned over what I held. This is what witnesses do, in the absence of an audience. They review, psychological reveal. Let me offer you the third and final truth, the one I have been moving towards since the first sentence. The methodologist believed, I know this because it is documented in his own hand in my pages, that what he was doing was defensive, that the architecture of control he was constructing was a shield, that by understanding how a mind could be dismantled, he could protect the minds of his own people from those who would dismantle them from the outside. He was not wrong. Exactly. He was something more troubling than wrong. He was afraid and correct simultaneously, which is perhaps the most dangerous condition a powerful man can occupy, because it meant his fear was validated by his results, and his results deepened his fear, and his fear justified the next study and the next compound and the next subject and the next set of sessions conducted in rooms with controlled temperature and institutional light and forms signed under false premises. It was a closed system, fear feeding justification, feeding action, feeding fear. He never stopped. Not because he was a monster. I want to be precise here. Because precision is the only thing that allows us to understand rather than merely condemn. He never stopped because stopping would have required him to look directly at what he had done, and looking directly at what one has done. Truly, without the softening apparatus of institutional language and national security rationale, is one of the most difficult acts a human being can perform. Most do not perform it. Most look slightly to the side, just enough to see the outline without the detail, and call that reckoning. I was eventually declassified, not all of me. Portions of my pages were redacted before I was released into the historical record. The redactions were done with a heavy black marker, applied with a thoroughness that suggested not censorship exactly, but something more like shame performing itself as procedure. The black bars on my pages are not silence. They are the shape of what someone decided was too specific to survive. Here is what was not redacted. The subject's name does not appear in my pages. It never did. He was a number, a subject number, assigned before the first session, used consistently throughout. This was standard protocol. It also meant that when historians eventually read me, when researchers and journalists and Senate investigators handled my pages with cotton gloves and careful eyes, they encountered a mind, a specific, irreplaceable, Ohio-born mind full of marigold orange and a girl's letters and the crack of a baseball bat, and without a name to attach to it. Without a name, a mind floats. Without a name, a wound becomes abstract, and abstract wounds are so much easier to catalog than bury. He was real. I want to say this clearly, because I held the evidence and I am, in the end, a kind of keeper. He was a 26-year-old man who had marigolds in his memory and futures in his sentences, and a specific, irreducible self that had taken years of living to assemble. And in 17 days under fluorescent light with a pen pressed into my pages as his only act of self-location, he lost access to significant portions of that self. Some of it returned. This is documented, not in my pages, but in other records. Records I only know about from the hands that later held me in archives, and the voices of those who read my pages aloud in hushed, careful tones. Some of it did not return. The future, tense I understand, took years to come back, and when it did, it was quieter, less populated, more provisional, as if the mind had learned somewhere in the body's deepest ledger that the future was a place you could not trust to still be there when you arrived. I have been asked in the years since my declassification to serve as evidence, and I do, readily, without resistance. I sit in archive boxes and on microfilm, and now, in digital reproductions that carry my stains and my foxing and my redaction bars into servers that hum with a frequency not entirely unlike the room where I was used. But I want to say something that evidence cannot say. The greatest harm done in my pages was not the compound that was administered. It was not the sleep deprivation, or the disorienting protocols, or the clinical distance with which everything was recorded. The greatest harm was the decision, made before I was ever opened, made in corridors I never entered, made by men in press shirts and unimpeachable credentials, that certain minds could be treated as territory, as land to be surveyed and, if necessary, reshaped. That the sovereignty of a self was, under the correct conditions, a negotiable thing. This idea did not die with the program. It never does. It waits, as ideas wait, for the next man in a pressed shirt who is afraid enough, and credentialed enough and certain enough of the necessity of what he is doing to pick up a pen and begin.